Hey guys, and welcome back to another Broken No Game video. Today's video is going to be covering the basics of supports, and I'm going to try and cover Cleric, Minstrel, and Sorc. So let's get to it. The first one we're going to cover is Cleric, right? So one of the biggest things for Cleric is that the stats that actually heal are based off of your physical defense and magical defense. So ideally a Cleric has, decent armor and a bunch of physical defense and magical defense. Note that clerics, they really thrive on stabs such as these. Now specifically what I'm talking about is it can greatly restore, not the greatly part, but it can restore up to 2 allies' HP. This is probably one of the best things for stab users. If you want to main a cleric, ideally you have a bunch of stabs that can heal more than one person at a time. That is pretty much your bread and butter and your go-to. If you can find these stabs, these are the keepers, maxim, upgrade them to L. They are worth it, and you can get this one actually for the rear vanguard set. So it's really good that they give this particular staff for free, or for 150 gems, not for free, my bad. Now phase 1 for clerics, and thank you, shoutouts to Kent from the SINoALICE fan-made Discord. I'm pretty much going over his guide. Phase 1, you pretty much use everything you can just so you can get points. Phase 2, and this is specifically aimed for Calo moving forward, right? You do not run any orbs whatsoever, even if they provide more stats. The reason being is that orbs essentially ruin your weapon rotation. They don't really add anything, and you're not really supposed to be attacking as a support in the Calo, because what happens is if you try attacking as a support, you do 90% less damage because you're part of the rear guard. So never use orbs, as they ruin your rotation and they kind of ruin everything. As far as skills goes with stabs, one of the best things to note is that stabs will automatically aim for the person who has the lowest amount of HP. So if you want to heal someone who's really low, it will auto target that, so you don't have to click anyone when trying to heal, right? Just know that you should have, if anything, if you're a cleric and you know someone's about to die in Calo or something like that, or someone's about to die in an event, have your staff on ready. So that means don't spam your stabs as soon as you have them. One of the skills that you want to look for actually for your instruments, if you do have them, is replenish magic. And the reason why you want replenish magic is because it will reduce the SP cost when using a specific skill. So if you use this instrument, essentially you have a chance of pretty much reducing the SP cost for certain skills. So that is ideally the instruments and tomes that you are looking for. I believe this one has it as well. No, it's support boon. I mean, ideally support boon doesn't really help clerics per se, and ideally you just keep having a bunch of these specific, not this one, I guess this is my only one. Nope, not this one. Did I lose it already? Felt like I lost it already. Yeah, replenish magic. This is ideally the one that you're always using. Now phase 2 and phase 3 and phase 4 essentially for a cleric is pretty much slowly removing your instruments and so on and becoming pure staff users. That's mainly aimed for Calo and such as that, and that's more of an endgame thing. So so just to recap for clerics, ideally you only run stabs at the end, but in the beginning you have a bunch of a mix set, and don't run orbs during Calo. And when your mix set is going on, keep instruments that have this skill, specifically replenish magic, and eventually your goal will be just to have stabs, right? And the goal will be to obviously have more physical defense and magical defense than any other. You don't really have to worry about magical attack and physical attack. Now let's move on to Minstrel, and shoutouts to the Dave, or the Dev, I think I'm saying that, on the fan-made Discord, right? Yeah, so the biggest thing with being a Minstrel is that it's the same thing similar to Cleric, where you want ideally weapons that can target 2 people, right? So for example, oh no, this isn't a good one. This one doesn't buff 2 people. Let's try to find one that buffs 2 people. Heroes Rhapsody? No. Well, this one is actually good because it greatly increases 2 stats. Not just 1 stat, but 2 stats. So that's pretty good as well. But it all depends. Like ideally, you have an instrument that can buff 2 different stats or buff 2 different people. I'm not there it goes. Slightly increases 2 allies' physical attack and magical attack. Now, it all depends on like what you're aiming for. But as a support, ideally 2 is always best, right? 2 is always best. And just know that I think most people know this. Blue is bad in this game and red is good. So reds are buffs and blues are debuffs. But I just want to reiterate that, right? Now, one of the most complicated things about minstrels, and I would say minstrels and sorcs have probably the most complicated jobs in the entire game, is because not only are buffs and debuffs based off of the user's current physical attack and physical defense. So for example, when I'm using this SR tome, let's click and hold, tap and hold, you will be using your physical attack to reduce the enemy's physical attack, i.e. your physical attack stats will be attributed to how much you reduce someone's stats. Now the biggest thing is that notice that there's this flavor text massively. Massively is connected to pretty much how you see there's like a level 4 thing right here. It says level 4. Now each skill is based off of like a different level. And what happens is you're going to kind of have to remember which books do certain things in the beginning or which instruments do certain things. So what does this mean for minstrel specifically? This means that if you have, for example, this one's a level 1 skill, so you can buff up to 2 people, right? Because this is the one that buffs 2 people. You can buff 2 people, and what happens is you can freely buff them from 1 to 7. So you can stack 1 buff, 2 buff, 3 buff, 4 buffs, 5 buffs, 6 buffs, 7 buffs. And once you get to 7 buffs, you will now have to move to a different skill. Let's say, for example, Heroes Harmony, like level 2, or no, not level 3 at the bare minimum. So this one's Heroes Rhapsody level 3, right? So this is the only time where you can push that person's buff past level 7. So it can go 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, that's why it's so difficult, is because you can no longer use this specific instrument to raise that person's buffs. And you can go up to 20 buffs in Arena. So you're probably wondering, like, well, like in Arena, I can only cast up to, like, the max amount of buffs someone can have is like 11, 15, or what have you. The max amount of buffs that you can actually stack to someone on Arena is 20. And in order to reach 20, you need to have a hero like buff that goes up to, like, this skill will say level 5. So, and it's very difficult, and obviously we don't have that like readily available to us. So as a buffer, you will have to have skills that grow along with you in order to snowball your people in Calo. And I think most people know this, like, Minstrel is probably one of the most coveted jobs in the entire game in Calo, because once you snowball someone to plus 15 like physical attack or magical attack, in Calo that person just one-shots the enemy team. So that's why Minstrel is like probably, I would say, just as good as Cleric, and sorcs are just as great as well. So let's transition now to sorcs. So we talked about earlier how physical attack, magical attack, physical defense gets equated into buffs. It's the same thing for debuffs. So if you want to debuff someone, for example, I'm going to click this tome, right? Tap and hold, tap and hold. When I use this Curse of Rust and reduce someone's physical attack, it's based off of the user's physical attack, not the weapon, right? Not the weapon. Remember, weapons they're stat sticks at the end of the day. They're just stat sticks that provide you stats. So my physical attack of 10,776 will be equated into how much I debuff someone. So this is actually an image that I picked up. Shoutouts to sheepman_white on Twitter. And this is how you can see, like, at 10 stacks or at 11 debuff stacks, there is a 90% amount modifier, as in you will use like 90% of, like, I believe, well, you know what, I'm not going to read into this because I don't want to speak incorrectly. Just know that this is like an image that's from JP, and this is what they use on how to debuff and buff, right? just know that it works the same way as buffs, where you want to essentially have level 2, level 1, level 3 skills slowly stacking, right? So if you want to get someone to below like at least minus like 16, right, you'll use something like this Knight's Diary and use Curse of Rust, right? You use Curse of Rust to massively reduce that enemy's attack. And this is really good if someone's snowballing in arena. You have a bunch of sorcs to stop that person from snowballing, and this is why sorcs are just as important as minstrels to stop the enemy team. And you can see how like the big 5 in your guild is like an important thing, because you don't want your team snowballing and you don't want the enemy team snowballing. Ideally, you have your sorcs that can stop the enemy team from snowballing. It should be really like, it should be great as long as you have these tomes available to you. And know that support boon is usually the skill that most minstrels and sorcs are looking for, chance to increase support effects. I don't know if that applies to debuffers. Now, the biggest thing with sorcs that makes them different is that they don't want skills that are passive. Like, for example, I believe this is the Pinocchio weapon. They don't like stuff like this. Chance of slightly reducing. You don't want the chance of slightly reducing. This is known as a passive in the support grid weapons, right? You don't want passives. This is the weapons that you actually want. Shoutouts to Graz from the SINoALICE fan-made Discord, who has dropped this knowledge. You want this. Support boon. Fixed chance to slightly increase support effects when in the backup slot. You want things that are technically not a chance to proc based off of when someone's attacking. You just want it to proc when you are technically doing something or something's being done, right? You don't want it to be based off of the enemy, because what if you're fighting like a bunch of AI or whatever? You just don't want that. You want to be actively taking care of your debuffs, and you want to have an active role. Because essentially having a passive role such as chance of slightly reducing enemies' physical attack, magical attack only when they're attacking, that is not good as a sorc, right? So ideally you do that. And of course, like, it's the same thing with all the other different support classes. You find a pretty much tome that can reduce stats for 2 people and not 1. Now, I don't believe I have a tome that can do that. I don't think so. Oh, okay, I guess this one does it. It's an A rank book. Obviously, it's not the best, but it can slightly reduce the physical attack and magical attack of 2 enemies. It doesn't have the good like Colosseum support, like support boon. Now, this is a good skill, but at the same time, it's A rank. And then as time moves forward, obviously supports will get weapons. As a support, I would say focus on pulling on banners that have more support items, right? And the biggest thing with support is always aim for pretty much skills with 2 effects. So this pretty much covers like clerics, minstrels, and sorcs. And just to recap all of this at the very end, essentially each job will eventually go mono grid for that weapon. I believe like most people know this sort of deal. I do know that you don't want to go mono grid because of Calo and like like the demon buffs, Shinma buffs, etc. You pretty much keep pushing your teams like CC, etc, etc. But the thing is like at the end of the day, you will do like specific things once we get to more of the end game, right? So, and then the next thing rolling over is that all supports want skills that do 2 things, either 2 heals, 2 buffs, 2 debuffs, etc, etc, to 2 different people, to do 2 different enemies. That is the biggest thing. And then for clerics, physical defense, magical defense are the main stats. Minstrels, the main stat is pretty much, and sorcs, main stat is every stat. Every stat matters as a minstrel, as a sorc, which are the instruments / tome classes. And the next thing is that buffs and debuffs are based off the skill number. So once you want to go to a certain level of like debuffing someone to -10 or going +10, you're gonna have to start using skills that are 3 and up, etc, etc. Anyways, Thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. And I will see you in the next one.